Good morning and welcome to our post-Sunday reflection this week. This is the last of a series looking at the Book of Ruth, and we see the story that we've been following come to its fruition, if you like. The last time we were with Ruth, she'd been, well, we may say seducing, at least negotiating, let's say, with Boaz, and the story ended well, that Boaz was willing to take her as his wife. But as we come into chapter 4, we find that there's an obstacle. And we found that at the end of chapter 3, that there is a redeemer who is first in line, not particularly to take Ruth's hand, because that wasn't part of what a redeemer had to do, but to have first call upon the inheritance, the land that we discover in chapter 4, that Naomi possesses her husband's land. The laws around inheritance and land are quite complex, and you can be forgiven for kind of being confused, and even reading through it and reading some commentaries to try and help me. There are various thoughts about what the rules were and what was allowed and what was not, and some are captured in the Bible and some are captured elsewhere, but the up and down of it appears to be that the Redeemer, most land was held effectively like on lease, because at Jubilee any land that was taken away effectively from the family would be returned to it, so any land that was sold would be returned to the family that owned it. So the titleship, the person whose family it was to belong to, was one of the key aspects, and those who paid for it in the meantime were paying for the time between that point and that Jubilee, when it would return to its original owner. The land was in Elimelech's kind of clan name, and hence the Redeemer was part of the clan, and this was a way of keeping the land within the wider family. And so when Boaz first meets with this Redeemer at the gate, the town of Bethlehem, most towns were on top of hills surrounded by walls, either made of the walls of houses joined together, or earlier in history they would have built substantial kind of fortified walls, and they may have remained. It's not clear what that point was, but the water was down the hill, so you had to come in and out of the gate every day to do your business, and so it was an obvious point for people to meet. It was kind of like the water cooler or the coffee machine in an office. And so Boaz waited and is chatting to this guy, and 10 elders gather, and that makes it a kind of official business. And at first the Redeemer agrees to take the land. It's in his interest. The land would have been passed to Elimelech's grandsons, but they were in a foreign land, so that they'd passed away rather, and so that didn't work. And so he would have acquired the land for perpetuity, which was a good deal for him. But Boaz points out then that he needs to take Ruth as a wife, and the commentators seem to think that wasn't strictly true. But if the wife then has a son, then it would pass to the son, and he would lose. This Redeemer would then lose the land, and it kind of go back down into Naomi and Ruth's family land. So that wasn't such a good deal. Boaz is offering instead, I will marry Ruth and I will make that the case. And so the guy steps back and says, I don't need the hassle. I don't want to work land that I'm going to lose. I've probably already got enough land that I can work, and he didn't see Ruth and Naomi, I guess, as adding to his labour force, and so he steps back and says, no, you can take it. And I just thought this whole moment, like we've watched the arc of the story of the plight of Ruth and Naomi, and God's been at work, and they've been clever, and they've been making shrewd moves and decisions, and there's been God's grace has been at work connecting Boaz and Ruth and kindling clearly what is love, and it all hangs in the balance over this person's decision. And how often in our lives do we feel we're in control, and maybe God's behind us, but we get to this point where we can't fix it, where it's out of our hands, where actually somebody else makes the call. And it's at that point you really, really have to trust in God, don't you? You have to trust that for all your machinations, that God has also been working on people's hearts and minds. And I'm sure God gifted Boaz the words that would convince the logical argument, that would convince the other redeemer. But I also think God was at work too, and we need to trust. There are often points when we just need to say, okay, God, I've done what I can. I've listened. I've followed your guidance. I've done what I feel is right. It's now with you. Those are hard times, but we need to be encouraged to stay with them. Of course, it does end well, and the guy steps back, and Boaz steps up and says, "I'll take Ruth as my wife." And the people around then offer their blessings, and they're kind of slightly backhanded blessings, because they mention Tamar, and they mention Leah and Rachel, and Tamar particularly conned her father-in-law into sleeping with her, thinking she was a prostitute, so she could kind of reclaim her place in the family line. And a little bit like Ruth, we questioned whether what she was doing was moral or right, but she was using the power she had in a man's world to regain her own power, to regain her own kind of place in society. And so perhaps the crowd of kind of, there's a bit of a nod to you shouldn't really have this blessing, but we recognise that God's worked through you, and we recognise the rules have been bent a little, and that your place in this family has come through. You know, the Redeemer didn't have to take the wife. This has been a gift for you. But they also say, that she is a respectable lady, so that she's won their hearts. So Ruth has found her home. Naomi's found security through love and through her respectability. The passage ends with a kind of bloodline, a genealogy, a family tree, and when you look through it, you kind of, if you know your Bible, there's all sorts of names that we don't know, but there are those we do. And despite the Boaz saying, he's going to get this for the clan of Elimelech, you'll notice Elimelech isn't mentioned, but the place of Boaz, and therefore Ruth, in the line from Perez to David is made clear. That line, of course, we find again, that genealogy we find again in the Gospels, going all the way to Jesus. And there are a few characters in there, and there are a few women who've used their wiles, and there are a few people who are not of the family of God, who would otherwise have been deemed Gentile or alien or outcasts. And it's a reminder, I think, and I think it's a reminder, the Gospel writers remind us that the line is not pure, as some might want it to be. The line is full of compromise, it's full of grace, it's full of love. And God's been flowing and working hard to make this story come to pass. But it's also a reminder, because of those names, that the purpose of Jesus was to bring everybody to God. The purpose of the people of God was to lead all nations to God. And the fact this line contains links to people like Ruth and Naomi and people like Tamar, it's just a reminder that God's plan's always been that, and that his promise kind of draws everybody in. And just as Ruth, the outsider, found her place in the family of God, and Naomi, who came back empty, found herself full because a child is born, and a next generation that will carry on that name is born, that in God's time everything will be brought to fruition. We all get to become part of the family of God. We all go from empty to full, from outsider to insider. We all get to know the fullness of God's love and our salvation. And so I pray if you're one of those people who find yourself on the outside, on the fringe, on the edge, marginalised, empty, bitter like Naomi was, stuck in your position, powerless like Ruth really was for a time, I pray that God will work in your life too, and that you would trust that God works for your blessing, works to bring you into the fold of the family, and works to bring us all into that place of peace. And so I pray for you, and pray there will be people like Boaz who will see you, who will not just love you and welcome you, but work the systems that stop you being part of that family. I pray that for you today. Amen. I hope you've enjoyed our going through the Book of Ruth, and thank you for being with us. As ever, if you want to be with us during our time of sharing together, where we chew this over as a church family, a family of God ourselves, then you're very welcome to join us. If you look on our website, you'll find links to join our Zoom meeting, and you can come and share your own thoughts and help us in the discernment process. I hope you'll also join us next week. I may be late in doing my reflection, or there may be a gap next week, I'm not sure, because our friends Reverend Louise and Richard Grossberg are going to lead the Zoom meeting that day, so I'll have to see if I can nudge them to do a reflection. But we're going back to Acts. We're going to look at Acts 2:22 and following, where we pick up where we left after Pentecost, and we're going to follow through the book of Acts for some time and watch the story of the church and God's people unfolding with the power of the Spirit. As ever, if you want to talk to me, I'd be very happy to do so. You can drop me a line on Facebook and I'll try and get back to you. But otherwise, we hope you continue to enjoy this, and we pray you will know that blessing. Amen.
The Lord bless you and keep you.
Make his face shine upon you
And be gracious to you.
The Lord turn his face toward you